This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream. Get a full year of CuriosityStream as well as my streaming service Nebula by using the link in the description. I love failed media. There's something so fascinating about it, you know? Just being able to look at something that didn't work, that didn't succeed, and try to examine why. Why didn't it catch on? Why didn't it all come together? Why did this thing exist, and how did it get this way? It's not about hating the content. No, it's about appreciating the content, breaking it down into its basic form to understand exactly what got us to this point. You know those moments in Kitchen Nightmares where Ramsay gets served a terrible tasting dish and then he uses his fork to break it apart and examine all the ingredients and how it was cooked? That's me, and these videos are my fork. Besides failed media though, I also love musicals. As a theater kid, it's one of my favorite mediums of storytelling. And I love superheroes, always have, probably always will. So if you combine all of those together, you can understand why I've had a decade-long fascination with Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark is a 2011 Broadway musical about Spider-Man that's incredibly infamous. It was co-written and directed by Julie Taymor, notable primarily for being the director of several acclaimed Shakespeare adaptations, The Lion King stage show, and Across the Universe, a movie that's good despite being obnoxiously Urban Outfitters. Bloated in budget, hated by critics, and plagued with several cast injuries, it didn't take long for Turn Off the Dark to become a punchline in the theater world, with everyone in the early 2010s trying to do their best to come up with the best Spider-Man singers. One of these days, someone may even tell a funny one. A lot of the buzz about Turn Off the Dark around that time and since has been on its production woes, trying to understand the history of how the show got like this and noting just how dangerous the entire production was. These are all valid and noble ways to look at the show, but it's not really why I'm here today. Because honestly that stuff is well asked and answered. Basically, any expose around Turn Off the Dark is going to spend a majority of its time focusing on that troubled production and laying out the history, and very little of them actually get into the meat of what the show is even about, barely even actually taking in any of the themes or the ideas or the quality of the narrative. And in a way, I get why this happens. The story behind Turn Off the Dark is fascinating. It's really weird, really dramatic, and really wild. It involves a lot of life-threatening stunt work and a complete retool and behind-the-scenes drama that's going to captivate audiences and reporters. Of course people are going to want to talk about it. But furthermore, for the longest time, it was the easiest and, at the time, only aspect of the show to report on. With no official pro-shoot recording of the production in any form, for the longest time the only way to experience Turn Off the Dark in any way was to either see it live, which, let's be real, was not easy to do for most people, or to buy the official soundtrack CD. And let it be said that this CD is perhaps the worst way to experience Turn Off the Dark. And I'm not just saying that because the songs all sound badly produced in a way that makes them feel somehow both hollow but also overdone compared to their stage counterparts. I'm saying that because not only does the official CD not have all the songs from the stage show, but it doesn't even put the songs in chronological order, with no liner notes or anything inside to give any sort of context to any of the numbers, their role in the plot, or their proper placement in the show. Young me had to rip this CD into iTunes and create a playlist based off a plot synopsis I found online. Also, side note, but this is my original CD copy I got 11 years ago from Best Buy. This was one of the last gifts my mom got me before she passed away, and whether or not that makes me owning the CD sadder or funnier depends on if you have a dead parent or not. Anyway, there's also the other reason why no one ever wants to talk about the plot of this play, and that's because from the moment it was announced, Turn Off the Dark was treated like a punchline. There was this sense, both in comic fan and theater nerd circles, that a Spider-Man musical was an inherently ridiculous and silly idea, and that's always a mindset that seemed weird to me. Like, we've had musicals about Jesus Christ, the Founding Fathers, and trains on roller skates, but Spider-Man is where we draw the line on something too silly for the stage. This is where we start entering the realm of critical elitism. Because of this, there was a lack of legitimate critics willing to take the story seriously, and definitely very little willing to engage with the work outside of the broader context of its production. There are so many videos and interviews that are nothing but reporters badgering the actors and the creative team, trying to squeeze as much gossip about the troubled production, the behind-the-scenes creative battles, and the on-set injuries.
That was when they delayed us again, I think. I don't know when they announced that Julie was.
I don't even remember
something
what it was.
Oh, now what happened when they announced that Julie was?
Well, we all we read somewhere that she was
being
leaving.
fired.
Did you feel Julie was betrayed by Bono and The Edge? And do you feel that she had
I don't know what, you know what?
And while these things are worth reporting, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't interested in them as well, it really is a shame that a work like this that clearly had a lot of effort and ambitions placed into it was treated with cynical, surface-level gossip reporting from a lot of critics, and fans automatically prepared to call it terrible. That bugs me. Not because the show isn't terrible, it is, but because I think people willing to call something bad should at least respect the material enough to engage with it first. Now, here we are. It's been about 12 years since the show did its first preview on Broadway, and it's been about 8 years since it finished its last show. In that time, I have consumed more Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark material than any sensible person should. I have tried to do my best to watch and learn as much about the show as humanly possible. And now I want to sit here and unpack it and analyze it and figure out exactly what makes Turn Off the Dark not work. Okay, so before we get too far into this, there are some background things I need to clear up. Like I said, I'm not going to go too far into the production stuff because a lot of it has been said and it isn't really relevant for what I want to talk about. If you do want to hear more about the production of Turn Off the Dark, you can watch an excellent video by Wait in the Wings that goes fully into it, or read the novel Song of Spider-Man by the play's co-writer Glenn Berger, which was a big help in making this video, and I will be quoting a lot. Seriously, if you like behind-the-scenes exposés like Disaster Artist, you owe it to yourself to read Song of Spider-Man. For now, I just want to focus on the pure basics I need to make sure you understand. Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark was written by Julie Taymor and the aforementioned Glenn Berger. The music was composed by Bono and The Edge from the band U2, a band that I theoretically should know songs from. It starred Reeve Carney as Peter Parker and Patrick Page as the Green Goblin. Yes, before Hades Town, these two met up here once again as Twink and Villain. The musical officially started its production way back in 2005, with Taymor signed on as director and essentially being the biggest creative overseer on the project. Taymor had grand ambitions for the play, both in terms of its plot and also its set design and theatrics. Particularly, she wanted the ability for Spider-Man to swing above the audience's heads throughout the theater and engage in large aerial stunts. This may make sense for the character, but this was a choice that ended up basically dooming the play forever. For starters, this inflated the budget by a lot, like a lot. Turn Off the Dark is the most expensive show in Broadway history, costing roughly $75 million. For context for those who don't keep up with theater stuff, the other most expensive Broadway shows are King Kong at $35 million and Shrek the Musical at $25 million, and both of those also struggled to make their money back. With a $1 million per week operating cost, Turn Off the Dark would have to sell out consistently for like 5 years before it could break even. We're talking Hamilton levels of popularity. The other thing is that the amount of technical resources really limited the amount of time the team could spend working on the show itself. They weren't able to do out-of-town previews like most other Broadway shows, and most rehearsal days were spent simply configuring their way through various tech problems rather than actually running the show. To the point where the first public preview night was the first time they ran through the show in full from beginning to end, and if you were a theater kid like me, then me saying that sentence probably just sent you into a panic attack. That first preview was nothing short of a disaster. You can find audio of it on YouTube. All things considered, the cast did a pretty good job holding their own and keeping the show together, but the other problem with the large technical requirement of the show is that it was prone to error. If one cog was timed wrong, the entire machine would basically break down. There were 4 moments in that first preview where they had to stop the show for technical issues. Tech issues would basically override the entirety of Turn Off the Dark's preview period. At best, they would cause slight delays in the show. At worst, they caused cast injuries, the most famous one being when one of the Spider-Man actors wasn't properly secured into a harness and ended up falling 30 feet into a pit. After an extended preview period of several months, critics began publishing their reviews, which were all scathing. There was a lot of negative attention towards Turn Off the Dark, and because of this, the producers and other creatives involved in the project decided to essentially do a coup and fired Julie Taymor. They were also going to be throwing out the original version of the play that was shown in previews, which is most commonly referred to as version 1.0, and revise the show to make it work however they possibly could. This version of Turn Off the Dark, called 2.0, made its debut in June of 2011 and ran until January 2014, when Turn Off the Dark was closed for good. So now that we have a basic understanding of our players, how we got here, and the multiple versions of the show we have to work with, I also want to just establish something else. So like I said, there isn't an official pro-recording of Turn Off the Dark in any of its forms. Because of this, I'm basing my views of the play on what I'm able to access, that being the original script for both 1.0 and 2.0, as well as several audio and video bootlegs. There's a channel called Turn Off the Dark Archives, which I will link below, that has been doing its best to compile as much of the play as humanly possible, and it's a godsend. I'm just giving this as a disclaimer right here, because there are some things I simply don't have access to. There's not a public high-quality version of 1.0 yet, just to give an example. So I just want you to know that I'm basing this off of what I do have, and that in editing you might see things like footage from 2.0 meant to represent 1.0, or a mix-up of actors and performers on stage at a given time, simply because, well, I have to work with what I have. With that in mind, let's go ahead and unravel Turn Off the Dark 1.0, first by starting with a simple question. What happens in the play? The musical begins with an action opening of Spider-Man trying to rescue Mary Jane from a giant cutout of Green Goblin. The scene is interrupted by our narrators coming in, a chorus of 4 comic book fans named Jimmy Six, Grim Hunter, Professor Cobwell, and GG, and if 3 of those names mean anything to you, then congrats, you're a fucking nerd. These 4 are called the Geek Chorus. Get it? And they're currently coming up with the story that we're being shown, sort of like that one episode of Batman the Animated Series or that one segment in Gotham Knight. They argue over how exactly this Spider-Man story should start when the girl of the group, GG, which is short for Girl Geek, interrupts to inform us that Spider-Man wasn't the first person given spider powers. She then begins to tell the others about their Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. No, I'm just fucking with you. She begins telling them the story of the Greek figure Arachne as we get our first actual song of the show, Behold and Wonder. Arachne was apparently a woman so good at weaving tapestries that she was challenged by the goddess Athena herself. Arachne still managed to make the best one, and Athena, angered at losing to a mere mortal, got mad and did something which caused Arachne to hang herself in grief because she couldn't loom anymore. And then as punishment for her vanity and for trying to be better than the gods, Arachne was cursed to become an immortal spider by Athena. We then cut to a high school where it turns out Peter Parker is giving a report on Arachne. He's a nerd, he's Peter Parker. He accidentally reminds the teacher to give them homework, and this angers Flash Thompson, whose crew then beats the shit out of him in our second song, Bullying by Numbers, while a bunch of girls make jokes about Peter jerking off. Once that's done, we get our third song, No More, in which Peter sings about how he wishes he could be anyone else. He meets up with MJ, who exchanges some awkward flirting banter with him before she joins in on the song to vent about how awful it is with her abusive alcoholic dad. Peter meets up with Uncle Ben, who asks him how he's doing, while MJ's dad yells at her. Peter talks about how he wants to beat up the bullies, and Uncle Ben tells him that he needs to rise above them. Peter does the "you're not my father" thing and then leaves. We then cut to Norman Osborn and his wife Emily. Oh, shit, that's me. I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't say that Norman is described in the script as Ted Turner-ish. Anyway, Norman and Emily are currently trying to combat climate change by doing experiments that would modify people's genes to be able to survive it. Which, sure. He has to pause his work, however, as a bunch of high school students come in for a field trip, Peter, MJ, and Flash being amongst them. The students observe two spiders having sex, while Peter describes how female spiders put out a sex lure into the air, and this somehow segues us into our next song, DIY World, where Norman sings about how genetic modification is going to keep mankind alive in any catastrophe. While this is going on, the female spider escapes and bites Peter. We then cut back to the geek chorus, who talk about how cool it is that the spider chose Peter at random, before Gigi interrupts to say that Peter wasn't chosen at random, but rather that he's special and that his destiny was woven by the three goddesses known as the Fates. We then cut back into the action as Peter wakes up in his bedroom to see that he's bouncing up and down off the walls in the next song, called, Bouncing Off the Walls. He goes to school and beats the shit out of a bunch of bullies and decides he needs to buy a car to impress MJ. The geek chorus talk about how excited they are now that Spider-Man is going to debut in his costume, before Gigi says that it's unrealistic because teenage boys don't know how to sew. We then see Peter enter a wrestling stage in a shitty homemade costume. He has a fight with an inflatable bone saw and wins, but on the way home decides not to intervene when Flash gets his car stolen. But then Uncle Ben walks into the streets to stop the car for some reason, and ends up getting run over and dying. This starts the big damn hero song, Rise Above, as Peter sings about the wisdom Uncle Ben passed on to him, before Arachne appears overhead, describing the red and blue colors of the Spider-Man costume and what they represent, and telling him to rise above. Finally, Spider-Man appears in the instrumental track NY Debut, swinging above the crowd and interacting with the audience and saving a woman's baby as she yells out, "My baby!" Next, we're at the Daily Bugle, where J. Jonah Jameson is mad that Spider-Man is getting positive buzz when Peter Parker comes in offering pictures of Spider-Man for sale. Cut to the Oscorp lab, where Norman is looking at the paper, seeing the coverage of Spider-Man, and putting the pieces together that it's connected to his research. The US military, who is apparently funding his operation, pressure him into stepping his game up to combat the sudden competition he has with Spider-Man in the song Pull the Trigger.
And point the finger, pull the trigger, throw them off your trail, you'll get yours eventually.
Meanwhile, Peter is telling MJ about how he takes photos of Spider-Man now, and MJ reveals that she has a crush on Spider-Man. She talks about her dreams of being an actress and asks if it's silly, especially as they are about to graduate high school. Peter begins to reassure her about their future in the song Picture This, or Not So Far Away in the script version, as they imagine their futures together. Peter is about to tell her he's Spider-Man, but as this is going on, back at Oscorp, Norman has decided to start experimenting on himself in order to accelerate his research, against the wishes of his wife. It ends up backfiring and his dear wife Emily passes away, may I rest in peace, after the machine explodes, and Norman is transformed into the Green Goblin, which looks like this. I'll let you take it in for a second. Okay, moving on. We then move back to the Daily Bugle offices, where news reports are coming in that the Green Goblin has been attacking military bases with pumpkin bombs and he's kidnapped 15 scientists off-screen. And then more news comes in that Spider-Man rescued everyone off-screen. We then go to the top of the Chrysler building, where the Green Goblin has situated a piano so that he can sing a song called I'll Take Manhattan. Not the They Might Be Giants song, though. The Goblinification also turned him into Deadpool, apparently, as he's breaking the fourth wall and shooting the shit with the audience. We then see that Spider-Man was apparently drugged and forced up there by Goblin, who then offers him some champagne. Goblin tells Peter that he can call him Dad, since he birthed Spider-Man. He tells Peter that they're special, better than anyone else, and asks Spider-Man if he's read Nietzsche. Goblin continues to pressure Peter into giving into the act of killing and doing supervillainy alongside him as his boy wonder. When Peter rejects the offer, Goblin says he'll go with Plan B. At this point, the Geek Chorus interjects and, needing to come up with a Plan B, decide that Mary Jane is now tied to a gargoyle nearby. Goblin and Spider-Man have a climactic air duel that has them swinging over the audience before the Geek Chorus interrupt again to try and figure out how Spider-Man saves the day. They decide that Green Goblin ended up getting roped up in his piano somehow, and he and it fell down from the Chrysler building to his death. Peter rescues Mary Jane and swings off in celebration as Arachne looms overhead, and so ends Act 1. I hope you were following all that, because Act 2 is where shit really starts to get, a bit off the rails. The geek chorus steps onto the stage and go through a checklist of the Spider-Man story tropes they need to hit, deciding that they've done it all. Then GG interrupts and says that they haven't had Spider-Man face his ultimate enemy yet, but nobody is quite sure who the ultimate Spider-Man enemy is. They have what is described as a, quote, supervillain fashion show, as Lizard, Carnage, Kraven the Hunter, Electro, Swarm, and new villain Swiss Miss, who Gigi comes up with on her own, strut down a runway for consideration as the role of the big bad. As this is going on, in the world of the play, Peter is struggling to take down all the new supervillains, as well as dealing with his professional and personal life, apparently being late to all of his jobs and classes and dates with MJ. As Peter passes out from exhaustion, Arachne emerges from the astral plane and sings the show's title song, Turn Off the Dark. The song is essentially her singing about how she is both fear and desire, as she elevates Peter from his bed and sings about how she wants to fuck him. Right before she kisses him, though, Peter gets a call from MJ and falls back down, waking up. Peter suddenly begins talking to the geek chorus for some reason, the first and only time any character in the show has directly acknowledged and interacted with them, who ask him if he's really going to meet up with Mary Jane after he just got seduced by Arachne. He stalls and says that what happened was just a dream. Peter ends up missing MJ's performance of a musical version of The Fly, which, God, I wish that was real. The two argue about Peter always letting her down as they sing a duet called I Just Can't Walk Away, Say It Now. Peter, frustrated, literally says, to hell with Spider-Man, and throws away his costume, giving up being Spider-Man so he can have a normal life, much against the wishes of the geeks. Arachne descends down from the astral plane with her army, the Furies, angry that Peter has given up being a superhero. She sings the song Think Again, all about how he's wasting the gifts she gave him and that she needs to do something to change his mind. Meanwhile, at the club, Peter meets up with MJ and tells her that he loves her before they kiss. As they kiss, however, there's a blackout. Suddenly, footage of the Green Goblin emerges on the club's TV monitor. This surprises the geeks, who aren't sure what's happening and how to undo it, only to be told by the Furies that the story is under their control now, scaring the geek chorus off and out of the show. Back on the TV monitors, the Green Goblin states that he and the Sinister Six, well, Sinister Seven in this version, are not actually dead anymore, and that they're taking over the city. The Sinister Six have a number called Sinisterio, in which they destroy everything. In Peter's apartment, MJ and Peter eat canned food and talk about what to do about the blackout in the Sinister Seven, then they snuggle and flirt. Meanwhile, in the astral plane, Arachne is reading the Daily Bugle and is angry that none of the mayhem she's caused is being covered in the papers. She's also mad that Peter isn't falling for her. What follows next is the best moment in musical history, one of the most infamous moments from the show.
What does that little Mary Jane have that I don't have? 2 legs and a pair of shoes. Well, I have 8 legs and... Get me the shoes! Spider-Man is mine, that girl can rot. We'll see who gets to tie the knot. Shiny black blue, you should know what to do. They're gonna make a deep impression on you.
In the song Deeply Furious, Arachne orders her Furies to steal shoes from all over New York. The reason for this varies depending on what version of 1.0 you consume. In one version, it's so that she can descend from the astral plane and go to the Daily Bugle office and try to convince Jameson to print her story about the Sinister Six. She does this by wrapping her 8 spider legs around him as he moans out in ecstasy. In other showings of 1.0, Arachne wants the shoes so she can impress Peter Parker enough that he'll marry her, even staging a wedding with him, though it's unclear if that was something happening to the real Peter or just an illusion. I'm still not sure. While this is happening, the corset-clad Spider Furies sing about wanting to tie you, dress you, and suck you up. It's the best scene in musical theater history. Peter wakes up from the wedding nightmare. MJ comforts him, singing the Homestuck AMV song, If the World Should End, about how she'll love Peter even if the world ends tomorrow. And then she quickly gets kidnapped by Kraven. Peter freaks out and sings the Big Damn Hero number, Boy Falls from the Sky, about how he needs to believe in himself and be Spider-Man again so that he can save her and everybody else. He fights the Sinister Six before ending up at the moment from the start of the show, with Green Goblin throwing Mary Jane off the bridge. As Peter jumps down to save her, he lands on what the script calls the world's wide web of Arachne. Peter is surprised to see that Arachne is real as she explains her plan. The Sinister 6/7 were never actually brought back to life. People were never killed. These were all illusions she made specifically to bait Peter into being Spider-Man again and to notice her senpai. She talks about how much she wants to fuck Peter, but he keeps asking for Mary Jane. She gets mad and releases spider pheromones, which causes him to forget about MJ momentarily. Arachne now tries to determine whether or not Peter is strong enough to be her husband. Love me or kill me, Arachne sings over the song's final number, saying that Peter needs to either abandon MJ and love her forever so that she may ascend and stop being an immortal spider, or he needs to kill her so that she can ascend and stop being an immortal spider. As the two fight, though, Arachne realizes that Peter will never kill her and never let go of his love for MJ, and she decides to let him go be with her. This apparently shows that she still has some humanity, however, which lifts her curse and lets her die, and she ascends into heaven on the rope that she hung herself with, and then the play ends there. It just ends there. Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark! Okay, so I have some thoughts. Let's start off with some general, simple observations. The performances I've seen are pretty good. Obviously, without a definitive pro shoot, it's hard to pinpoint exactly who each performer is and what exactly they're doing, but Patrick Page brings great energy to Green Goblin, and if you're a Hadestown fan, you owe it to yourself to look up footage of Reeve Carney in the show, because he brings the same himbo twink energy to Peter Parker as he did to Orpheus.
I guess I kind of had it, but I was trying to figure. That makes sense. I didn't know it was the old Paula Spot booth, though. Nice. He hit it. That's hard, man. I still have trouble with that note. Oh, he went screamo on that.
This might be controversial, but I don't really like the visuals of the show. They're usually the one thing it's praised for, and I'm sure that they're more impressive when actually viewed live and not seen over bootleg or promo video. But so much of the visual design here doesn't really work for me. The stunts are cool, some of the sets are cool, but it also really seems like it's trying too much for style where it really doesn't need it, which as a result gives it the unintentional effect of looking actually really cheap. The Sinister Six costumes are notorious for this, looking like bad theme park outfits and Halloween costumes, but I want to point out Bonesaw being a literal inflatable. Like, why? Just get a chorus member in a t-shirt. And then there's the scenery and props, which I get are trying to look like comic drawings, but like, come on, this is silly. Look at the bed. Look at these desks. This looks less like an intentional style choice and more like a high school production who couldn't afford a bed because the director spent all the budget on a golf cart, so instead a parent had to come in and draw a bed on some foam board he brought in from Lowe's. It actually reminds me a lot of Ang Lee's Hulk, weirdly enough, an attempt to emulate the style of comics without really understanding why the medium makes the choices that it does. The music is variable. The songs generally range from good to fine, and most work okay within the context of the show, if not entirely memorable. At its worst, it's,
Get me the shoes!
but most of it is serviceable. Rise Against and Boy Falls from the Sky are too generic of music numbers to really appeal to me, but the two big Goblin songs, Pull the Trigger and DIY World, are fun times. No More is a good scene setter, and technically fits my rule that every musical needs to have a We Live in a Shithole musical number. Then there's I Just Can't Walk Away, which, I'm gonna be fully honest here, I think is an outright great song. A damn good musical number and a damn good ballad. Admittedly, I'm a sucker for a good romance song. They remind me of my relationship with my husband, the Green Goblin. But I also think the melody and lyrics of this really work, conveying a sense of romantic longing as well as lingering sadness. And I love the double meaning of the main lyrics. I Just Can't Walk Away works both to convey Peter's inability to quit being Spider-Man, as well as MJ's inability to fully give up on her love of Peter. The songwriters had 3 minutes to capture what makes the Peter and MJ relationship complicated and dynamic and engaging, and they nailed it in my opinion. If you're like me and grew up watching the Raimi trilogy, this song does a good job giving off the same vibes as the love story there. In fact, if you're familiar with the Raimi trilogy, you might have noticed that this play pulls a lot from those films, the first two in particular. The first act is basically a redone version of Spider-Man 1, with the origin story and MJ being the initial love interest and next-door neighbor, with even Bonesaw appearing. The second act takes from Spider-Man 2 with the whole Spider-Man No More adaptation and the subplot that Peter might be losing his powers. Though it's unclear in Turn Off the Dark if he's actually losing his powers or not. I think it depends on the version. Green Goblin's backstory is essentially Doc Ock's from Spider-Man 2 as well. The whole guy does a science experiment to improve humanity and ends up killing his wife and going mad thing. If you're wondering why they gave Norman Osborn that backstory rather than his Spider-Man 1 origin, well, Julie Taymor just didn't find that storyline for Norman interesting and liked Doc Ock's origin more. So, yeah. Separating the main movie plots into both acts is interesting because when you get down to it, both acts essentially act as their own narrative rather than one big continuous one. Kind of like Into the Woods. The first act is all about setting up Spider-Man, and the second act is all about breaking it down, showing the complexities of being a superhero. Whether or not this works is... well, you see, there's some narrative issues with Turn Off the Dark, things that seem a bit strange. What the fuck am I trying to bear the lead for? We gotta talk about the fucking spider. We gotta talk about Peter Parker fucking a spider. Arachne. The Greek mythological figure Arachne, made famous from the classical poem Metamorphosis. Arachne. Why is she here? I mean, I know why she's here. She's here because Julie Taymor saw the first page of Ultimate Spider-Man in which Norman Osborn talks about Arachne. Meaning, like most things in the world, it can all be traced back to Brian Michael Bendis. It was apparently this page and the idea of merging Spider-Man with the myth of Arachne that caused her to agree to the project in the first place. Arachne is instrumental to this play. From the ground up, it was made with her in mind. Which is buck wild to think about when you consider how out of place she feels here. Like, on its surface, Turn Off the Dark is a basic retelling of two well-known Spider-Man storylines from the comics and movies. It has a very conventional, expected character arc for Peter, in which he has to learn about the importance of responsibility and how to be a hero, mixed in with this story about him needing to fuck a spider so that she can die and go to heaven. But okay, I need to take this seriously. Obviously, she's an important integral part of this plot. I just have to figure out why. So let's break down Arachne's arc, okay? So Arachne in this play is essentially a woman out for vengeance and revenge. She was a simple artist whose talent led to her downfall and, as a result, ended up cursed to become a spider. The first spider, to be exact. It's implied that she is involved in giving Spider-Man his powers, that she chose to give him this gift to see what he would do with it, and to accomplish her own goals. There's a certain parallel to be seen with her and Peter, certainly. Both were mortals blessed with powers that could be viewed as a curse. Peter spends Act 2 wanting to rid himself of his spider alter ego so that he can go back to being a normal person, much like how Arachne wants to rid herself of her spider persona and move on in life. But of course it goes a bit deeper than that because the myth of Arachne is about hubris. Arachne was turned into a spider as a form of punishment for daring to believe she was better than the gods. The idea of transcending beyond mortals is a huge through line in Turn Off the Dark. Goblin starts off with the goal of improving all of humanity before mutating and realizing that he has ascended beyond everyone else, comparing the non-goblins and Spider-Man of the world to ants and saying that puny little humans keep getting in the way. This is what connects the Goblin and Arachne section of the play, despite how disconnected they feel. Both want Peter to abandon the identity of Peter Parker and embrace whatever their image of Spider-Man is. In Goblin's case, it's being a fellow villain and criminal. In Arachne's case, it's being a lover and a fellow god above men. Wait, hold on, I think I have something here. I think it's all coming together. This is how the geek chorus tie in, right? Because the whole thing is that we're seeing the version of the play dictated by 4 comic book fans, each with their own interpretation of who Spider-Man is and what he represents and how he should behave. They bicker and argue over what exactly should play out in the story because to them, Spider-Man means very different things. This also ties back into the Arachne angle once more. Greek myths are quite a fluid thing, with so many versions and interpretations of the events depending on the orator. Arachne is a simple story, and yet there are so many variations of it. Some where Arachne lost her contest with Athena, some where she wins, some where she is killed by Athena, some where Athena curses her out of anger, some where Athena curses her out of pity, and perhaps most importantly, some where Arachne is a hero, and some where Arachne is a villain. Everything is up to the interpretation of the storyteller and the narrator. At a certain point in time, the lesson of don't disrespect the gods might have led to Arachne's fate feeling more justified. But also from a certain perspective, Arachne's, for example, it could be a tragedy. How will they tell your story? How will they tell your tale? And will anybody even care? This is why Arachne and the Furies taking control of the story from the geek chorus, which obviously is our stand-in for the Greek chorus, in Act 2 is so meaningful. It is Arachne allowing herself control of her own narrative for the first time in her life. The problem is, however, that Arachne has lost sight of her original goals and ambitions. At this point, she is motivated primarily by wrath and basic carnal emotions. She is a woman who has been denied and deprived of everything she loves and her own agency, and she wants to take things into her own hands for once, even if it means stepping into the villain role to do so. Love me or kill me, Arachne belts out to Peter in the final song. And truly, these are the only 2 options to her. Either receive the praise and adoration that she wanted and feels like she deserved back in her original life, or fulfill her other desire and let her die in no peace. But these aren't things that can happen, can it? Batman Under the Red Hood is a popular and well-loved 2010 direct-to-DVD film based upon a significantly less popular and loved comic of almost the same name. The film is about Batman trying to investigate the murder sprees caused by a mysterious new vigilante by the name of Red Hood, who appears to be killing off mobsters and knows a lot of personal info about Batman. Red Hood turns out to be, spoilers for 20 years of comic history, Jason Todd, the second Robin, who years earlier was beaten to death with a crowbar by Joker. It's a fine enough movie. Some great voice performances and a pretty good script distract from the generic DC direct-to-video animation style that I've honestly never been a fan of, and the fact that once you've experienced one Jason Todd story, you've basically experienced them all. But overall, I think it's a good film, and the main reason why I think people remember it as fondly as they do is because of the strength of the final confrontation scene. Here, Red Hood, now fully open about being Jason Todd, has revealed that his entire plan was a gambit to get his hands on the Joker. He leads Batman to this abandoned building and gives him a choice. Either Batman kills Joker, Jason kills Joker, or Batman kills Jason to stop him from killing Joker. Either way, someone has to die. This creates a moral dilemma for Batman. As Batman, he can't kill. That's his whole thing. He can't kill Joker, and he can't let Jason kill Joker, otherwise he becomes just as bad as Joker himself. He also has to take out criminals and murderers and make sure they're brought to justice, and Jason is now a criminal and murderer. But as Bruce, he can't hurt Jason. Jason, despite everything, is his son, and he can't let Jason fall down the same route of vengeance that he fell down. But he knows that he can't really justify this, not to Jason, because Jason will not listen to him, and any answer he gives or any action he takes is only going to hurt him. He loves Jason, but he cannot love Jason right now with how he is. It's a battle of human emotions versus overall morality. I bring this up not only because I have an incurable condition where I can only see the world through Batman comparisons, but because theoretically, this is the same conflict at the end of Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, right? Jason at this moment is basically telling Bruce to love him or kill him, to show Jason that he truly cares about his pain and torment and that he's willing to stick by him, or to just kill him and let him be put to rest. And much like the way Peter rejects both offers, Bruce walks away, refusing to play Jason's game and finding his own solution. And much like under the Red Hood, Peter can't accept any option. It's a conflict between his identity of Spider-Man and his reality of Peter Parker. Spider-Man doesn't kill. The last thing he wants is a death caused by his hands. To allow himself to kill would be to allow him to give into the same selfish impulses that led to his uncle being murdered. Spider-Man has the power of a god, and he cannot use that power indiscriminately. But at the same time, loving Arachne is impossible because, well, Peter Parker loves Mary Jane. That's something that cannot and will never change. To love Arachne would be to leave his humanity, and perhaps most importantly, his love of MJ behind. And much like Jason Todd, Arachne doesn't realize that she became the very thing she was once against. In this conflict, she has assumed the role of an omniscient god, wanting to punish Peter for defying her will, for not properly appreciating her gift, and taking away his agency and trying to deprive him of the thing he loves. Much in the same way Athena never properly respected her, she doesn't actually respect Peter, seeing him only as a being that should worship her and assist her in the things that she wants. But then we get to the resolution of this conflict, which is similar to another famous musical, Phantom of the Opera. There, the Phantom kidnaps Christine and Raoul and forces Christine to choose, either be with him or he'll kill Raoul. In the end, when Christine shows him a bit of compassion, he folds, remembering his humanity and respecting Christine's agency and wants, lets her go. Similarly, Arachne, realizing that Peter will never ever abandon his humanity and will always love MJ, lets Peter go, showcasing that somewhere deep within, Arachne hasn't lost her humanity. It's an act of kindness and grace that allows her to be free of her curse and move on, thus putting Peter back in control of his own story, free from the chorus, free from Arachne, as he makes one final swing and we get our last image of the show, a Merle of Spider-Man, showing at the end who this story is about. Y'all, is Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark actually good? Wait, what the fuck am I saying? Of course it's bad, holy shit. What I just did was an exercise in tunnel vision. When you get in so deep with analysis or the creative process, you can see connections and thematic qualities, and once you get in there, it's easy to view it from the perspective where things all click into place and are working the way you think they work. But at a certain point, you have to step back and see that things actually don't. Arachne doesn't work in this play because the play itself doesn't work. These ideas all sound good in theory, but only in theory. The type of theory that you get when you've spent years and years of your life contemplating it and stuck in the mindset of trying to figure out what place Arachne has in the show. Arachne doesn't work here because there's not enough balance in how she's handled. She spends all of Act 1 basically as a background character and then gets an incredible amount of spotlight in Act 2 without much in the way of a proper introduction to why exactly she's here and what role she plays in the plot and what all she can even do. Like, they had all summer to figure this out and they never actually figured out what Arachne does. It's a rare thing of a character getting too much time but also far too little time. The final twist, that the Sinister Six didn't really come back and that this was all Arachne's illusions, doesn't really play well when it happens at the last minute with such a little fanfare and not much in the way of explanations for how it worked. Like, if the chaos was fake and no one actually died and the Sinister Six weren't brought back to life, then what happened? Was the blackout real? Were the people panicking real? Does it even matter? What? And what's this with her curse being lifted? Like, it's not explained why it happens or what reasons or what the conditions of the curse are. Like, there's nothing that makes it seem like this is a Beauty and the Beast situation at the start of the show. And any parallels in Arachne and Peter's arc don't feel meaningful because these two characters don't really have any personal connection. Like, Peter doesn't know that Arachne is even real until that final confrontation. Imagine the ending of Phantom of the Opera, but there's no music of the night or anything like that. The two characters never met. Christina's just like, oh no, it's some guy. From Peter's perspective, Arachne is someone he did a school report on and then saw in his dreams a few times. It's like you did a history project on Alexander Hamilton, and then a year later, Hamilton is in your room, grabbing you by the shirt collar and saying, "You have to fuck me or I'll die." It's not much of a dramatically weighty choice, is it? A large part of the reason why the dynamic and character parallelism isn't there is that the songs from Bono and The Edge fall into the trap that a lot of amateur musical theater writers fall into, where the songs are basically almost entirely solos with a few duets thrown in. You see these a lot in productions where the songwriters don't have a lot of musical theater experience because, well, it's easier to write solos, and it's what a lot of people's instincts are going to guide them to. This character gets a song, then this character gets a song, then maybe these two characters get a love song, and they'll sing it together. Especially when you've been composing for a band for like 30 years, that's going to be the mindset that you approach a project with. And basically all of these are feel songs where characters sing about their emotions, which isn't a bad thing. Musicals need these. There's also very little in the songs that actually progress the plot and further the story along. You could remove the songs and you wouldn't lose anything here.
Get me the shoes!
Okay, you can remove most of the songs and you wouldn't lose anything here. The songs tie into a larger problem with Arachne's role, and by extension the show as a whole. Arachne's arc overshadows Peter's, especially in Act 2, where she gets 3 solos while Peter gets 1. If you want an easy demonstration of the issue, when Peter quits being Spider-Man, we don't get a song to show how he feels about it, but we do get a song on how Arachne feels about it. Peter's arc gets lost in this whole thing because it feels like the play just doesn't really care much about him compared to Arachne.
When you hear these songs, for Peter Parker, they transcend Spider-Man. They're songs that really are deeply from Bono and Edge's heart.
Get me the shoes!
Side note, but this is also why the Raimi films work so well, because Raimi is enough of a weirdo to make the villains compelling, but he also cares enough about Peter Parker and is an empathetic enough filmmaker to not lose track of Peter's storyline and struggles throughout. There's also just the underlying ways the whole Arachne plot undermines the idea of Spider-Man. They even sort of joke about this in the show, the idea that Spider-Man could be anyone and that's what makes his story meaningful, before it gets disregarded to introduce Arachne stuff. But storylines about Peter Parker being a special little chosen boy suck. It sucked in the Amazing Spider-Man films and it sucks here. The moral isn't or shouldn't be that Peter is a great hero above the rest. It's that he was an ordinary kid from a bad neighborhood who was given a gift by chance and used it to become a powerful force of good. A lot has been written about Arachne being a self-insert for Julie Taymor, and there's certainly stuff to look at there. Famously, when presented with the idea of Arachne being cut from the show, Julie apparently once said,
"If all of you think the cut is such a great idea, you can do it without me. Because that isn't a cut, it's a mastectomy."
Which is a very charged response to wanting to cut the Spider-Woman from your Broadway show. Glenn Berger directly draws a parallel between the two of them in Song of Spider-Man.
On screens less than 3 months before, Julie had Prospera lament to her daughter how she was deposed and they were sent into exile by conspirators to cry to the sea that roared to us. And every night at the Foxwoods, audiences watched an artist brought low after her artistic creation was destroyed. Arachne was punished for remaining true to her art, whispering wretchedly to Peter in the title song, "I am the queen of dreams, banished to a shadow prison." Almost 6 years before, I asked Julie, why did Arachne try to kill herself after her tapestry was destroyed? Instead of the explanation found in most versions of the myth, that Arachne hung herself from shame over her conduct toward Athena, Julie said Arachne made the noose because her artistic impulse had been thwarted. In fact, Julie said Arachne wasn't punished for thinking she was more talented than the goddess of weaving. She was being punished for actually being more talented. In other words, Julie had unwittingly reinterpreted one of the most iconic myths about hubris as not being about hubris at all. Was that a symptom of hubris? Or was it simply one artist sympathizing with another?
I think the thing that pulls me into this quote, though, is rather than looking at it from the perspective of, is this Julie Taymor's self-insert, I'm thinking more of, is this a reflection of Julie Taymor's view of art? Taymor took the tale of Arachne, and by extension the tale of Spider-Man, and turned them into stories in which someone is incredibly talented and skilled in ways others simply cannot understand and thus get mistreated because of it. With Arachne, it's her work being destroyed and her curse to be a spider. With Peter, it's the way the musical emphasizes his poor reputation in the Bugle and from Jameson. It's interesting that around the time major creative work on Turn Off the Dark was being done, Taymor was dealing with the release of Across the Universe, a movie for people who wished Rent had more Beatles songs in it. The release of that movie was infamously chaotic, with Taymor and studio executives at war to see what version of the film would be the final cut before the studio deliberately sabotaged the release, labeling the film a flop and getting Taymor the reputation of being a prima donna director. Here was a woman who poured her heart and soul into a project that a lot of people, mainly teenage girls going through a British twink phase, liked a lot only to have her work disrespected by those who didn't understand her vision and wanted to undermine it and villainize her throughout the process. And this attitude is reflected in the show. Despite whatever implications the ending provides, the show mostly focuses on the idea that Arachne and Peter and Norman are figures literally above normal people, whose actions will never be understood by those lesser, which is a really depressing moral, actually, both for a superhero and an artist. Of course, all of this explains the Arachne angle, but there's still another angle left unexplored. Why is this play so relentlessly horny? Like, why does this plot revolve so much around sex, especially between Peter and Arachne? Why does jerking off come up so much? Why is there so many moans and weird spider fetish shit? I mean, according to The Edge, we should interpret the final fight between Arachne and Spider-Man as follows.
It's a fight to the death, but it's also a mating dance. It should feel intense between Peter and Arachne, like they belong together. And yet at the end of it, Peter demands to know where Mary Jane is. It's like calling out someone else's name during rough sex. You know?
Yeah, this play is very sexually charged. Apparently it was going to be even more so, according to Glenn Berger. In the original treatment they were presented, there was a scene where
Norman Osborn, flirting with the disguised Arachne, strokes Arachne's shoe, remarks on the delicacy of the foot beneath it. There are more where that came from, she remarks, whereupon another foot probes his crotch, reducing him to paroxysms of ecstasy. More and more legs emerge and twine around him, and his song of ecstasy becomes a wail of terror.
Yeah, this play is horny, incredibly horny, horny to its core. And why is that? Well, the answer is simple. Julia Taymor was trying to emulate another popular play of the era.
Spring Awakening was on Julie's mind. Teenagers are lining up. They think it's gonna be hip and edgy and sexy.
Yes, Spring Awakening. The play about a bunch of repressed teenagers going through puberty with songs about masturbation. Spring Awakening, which shares the same audience as Spider-Man. Yeah, I can see why 1.0 didn't take off. 1.0 ran for a few months before it was decided that it was in need of a substantial retool. It was always being retooled in some way, shape, or form. It was still in previews, technically. But with critical and audience reception being so bad, it was clear that there's a lot of work that needed to be done, especially with simplifying the plot and making the show more approachable. 1.0 was ambitious, sure, but it wasn't working. And more than anything, it was alienating its primary audience. There was one section in Berger's book that stuck with me.
It was December 20th. We were in the middle of Act 2. I couldn't bear to watch the show in the auditorium, so I was watching it on the monitor in the stage manager's office downstairs, and maybe it was the monitor, or maybe it was my mood, but Act 2 was sure seeming oppressive. I wandered to the men's room, and as I got there, I saw a mother escort her boy from the bathroom back toward the theater. The look on that boy's face changed my life. The boy didn't look eager to go back into the auditorium. In fact, he had the look of a boy who had come to the theater that evening full of excitement, and minute by minute, we were letting him down. He wasn't feeling the buoyant feelings he usually associated with the nimble-minded, upbeat superhero he adored. Where was that Spider-Man? Why did the world seem so dark? Maybe his face wasn't actually saying any of those things. Maybe he just had a stomachache. Why did he need the bathroom in the middle of the second act? But it didn't matter. I saw what I saw. I drifted back to the stage manager's office, convinced we were failing all the children coming to see our show. Our problems couldn't be fixed with a few clarifying lines. Our problems were deeper. They were systemic.
In all the Greek mythology and intense sexual desire of 1.0, the appeal of Spider-Man had been lost, making a work that couldn't properly be enjoyed by the audience who would benefit the most from having a good Spider-Man musical. Kids. Of course, Taymor disagreed in character as the Green Goblin for some reason.
Don't you get it, boy? The audience just wants high-flying stunts and fun. Forget the story we want to tell. They ain't interested. So if making it shorter is your way of solving the problem, maybe you're right. Who are we fooling with spirituality, mercy, compassion, transformation, resurrection, illumination, and shit?
But I mean, some plot streamlining needed to happen. That's something I think anyone agreed on, regardless of their view on the show as a whole. And if you're in charge with streamlining the plot, which currently has an issue of too many villains and too complex a narrative, who would you keep in the play? Green Goblin, Spider-Man's famous big bad, an ensemble dark horse played by Broadway darling Patrick Page, who is funny and charismatic and entertaining and has a big choreographed fight scene that's a showstopper and one of the few points of critical praise? Or Arachne, the not comic canon villain who has had 3 actresses at this point, whose main plot was horny and depressing and confusing, dominated Peter's story, and caused the play to end on a weird anticlimax. It's a tough decision. Anyway, 2.0 was underway. The play stopped previews in April and went through extensive rewrites. Julie Taymor was fired in a contentious coup as the producers began to become more hands-on with the project. Comic writer Roberto Aguirre Sacasa was brought in to rewrite the script, and if that name sounds familiar, it's because he would later go on to create Riverdale, because every pop culture thing you're into all comes back to Turn Off the Dark. 2.0's goal was to make more of a blockbuster show that everyone could enjoy, which meant making things more accurate to the comics and the films, lightening the overall tone, and drastically cutting down the runtime from almost 4 hours to 2. Yes, it is incredibly similar to that other superhero project with a famously troubled production. I won't go as in-depth on 2.0's plot as 1.0 because it's honestly not needed. They essentially took the Goblin stuff from Act 1 and extended it into a whole show. It's very similar, especially early on. Now the plot is very much the Raimi films: Peter high school, spider bite, wrestling, gets overwhelmed, fights Green Goblin, quits being Spider-Man, gets pep talked back into it in time to beat the big bad who has kidnapped MJ, who finds out Peter's identity at the end before he swings off to save the day again. It is way more simple and more what you'd expect. As far as any changes, well, the geek chorus are entirely gone, no sign of them in the show at all. They were one of the most complained about parts of 1.0 and definitely one of the weirdest, so I totally get that. There's no blackout in New York anymore, so MJ instead sings If the World Should End near the start of Act 2 on a bench as a way to comfort Peter and confirm her love. But it misses the context that they literally thought the world was literally ending, literally. And perhaps the big one, Arachne. To say she's gone from the show would be a lie. She's still here. I mean, they paid a lot of money for her costume, and she sings the title song. You can't just cut her. But her role is dramatically gutted. No longer is she the main villain, or even a character, really. Peter gives his report on her towards the beginning, where we still get a bit of her origin and Beholden Wonder. She appears in his dreams to sing a part of Rise Above, and reappears again in a dream to sing Turn Off the Dark. Her role has gone from tragic main antagonist to out-of-nowhere generic spiritual guide. It feels somehow weirder than when she was the main villain, because if you didn't know the production history of the show, you'd think that there's just a random Spider-Woman in this play for no reason whatsoever. Of course, with her not being the main villain anymore, her two villain songs, Think Again and Deeply Furious, got cut entirely. I know, rest in peace, Shoe Song. What could possibly take their place, though? Well, now that the Goblin is the main villain, he needs a Goblin villain song. So they retooled a section from Deeply Furious into A Freak Like Me Needs Company, the only new song composed for 2.0 and the best thing I've ever heard. A Freak Like Me Needs Company is a flamboyant coming-out anthem for the Green Goblin, who in this version has just kept mutating himself more and more after his wife's death, and has now kidnapped military agents and transformed them into the Sinister Six. It's really important to note here that despite being a villain song, the official recorded lyrics for A Freak Like Me Needs Company don't actually mention any villainous acts at all. Instead about being broke and being weird, but giving up your straight life, and gathering up a bunch of your fellow freak friends, and dressing hot, and hitting the town. It is a gay anthem, and we will be welcoming the Green Goblin to Pride. I also wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't reference the incredibly awkward Letterman performance of this song that later got parodied on Comedy Bang Bang. There's so many things about this performance that are so legendarily uncomfortable, but I'd like to nominate the line that makes it sound like Craven fucks animals.
This next guy loves the animals, sometimes a little too much. Craven the Hunter!
A Freak Like Me Needs Company is really the high point of 2.0. It's bombastic, it's out there, it's energetic. Patrick Page carries it with a lot of charisma and energy and funny jokes, legit funny jokes. But it's the high point. The rest is... 2.0 is a more functional musical. It looks more like what you'd expect a Spider-Man musical to look like, and comes off way more competent as a result. But the weird thing is that despite the simplified plot, the shorter runtime, and the funnier script, 2.0 felt way more boring and exhausting to sit through than 1.0 did, both reading and consuming whatever bootleg material I had of it. There's sort of a thing where licensed musicals are usually, bad. Is it rude to say that? The 2010s would be especially awful about this. A lot of movies and TV shows and media properties would get licensed for stage musical remakes, and for every Heathers or Beetlejuice, there's a, well, Mean Girls, the musical, I had an entire video I co-wrote about that. Shows that are just painfully generic and add nothing to either the medium or to the original work, that run on Broadway for a year or two and then get tossed aside to be cursed to the fate of national tours and high school productions. I know I made the comparison earlier, but 2.0 really does remind me of Justice League. In a lot of respects, it's a course correction and probably what the project should have looked like from the beginning, But the revision is so sloppily trying to stitch together conventional material to its unconventional origin in a way that makes the generic aspects of the revision stick out even more. And then it becomes a question of what you'd prefer. A flawed, ambitious, messy, auteur-driven piece, or a technically polished piece of art made by a commission that is, at best, functional. I think Julie Taymor herself said it best when the revisions were first pitched to her.
Once you open that door, they'll want to do it. And then, forget it. It'll be a theme park show. This is how shows die, when people start abandoning the vision that got us here.
And the thing is, they did abandon that vision. And they abandoned Julie to do so, giving her the reputation for being a terrible, controlling, irresponsible woman. And maybe she is. But the fact of the matter is that they gave Julie Taymor $65 million to fulfill her vision of the show, and then panicked at the last minute when they realized she gave them her version of the show she was always pitching. Taymor sincerely tried to do something here, and for that, she got fired and has essentially been kept away from any major theater or film work since then. She went from being a critical darling and creative force behind one of the most profitable musicals ever to an industry pariah. Love her or kill her, as they say. Turn Off the Dark is such a weird fucking show. A messy, thematically confusing, and weirdly horny piece of art. It went down in history as Broadway's biggest flop, a critical and financial failure. It's been a punching bag for over a decade now, and will still continue to be a punching bag. And yet, I can't help but feel some form of admiration and fascination with the original version of the show, with what it once was and what it was trying to do. The play was bad. 1.0 isn't some hidden gem. It was definitely in need of revisions and work. But it was this weird, strange, ambitious project that was far from an act of corporate cynicism that the general public and its producers seemed to want to paint it as. Some may say that a Spider-Man musical was always a cursed idea, that there was no way something like this would ever work. To that I say, nah. I mean, look at it this way. Tom Holland's Spider-Man is incredibly popular with teenagers, especially the Tumblr crowd. And that Tumblr crowd also is really into high school and teenager-focused musicals, like Be More Chill and Dear Evan Hansen. A version of Spider-Man that draws from the Holland version and sounds like Greatest Showman would probably do gangbusters. As for Turn Off the Dark, I highly doubt we'll ever see a production of it again. After it closed on Broadway, they announced that they were going to try to open it in Vegas, where it probably should have always been, to be honest, before those plans got changed into an arena tour that also never ended up happening. The problem with Spider-Man is that unlike other underperforming licensed shows like Shrek or SpongeBob, it's not easy to simply put it on tour or license it for schools or whatever because it simply requires too many elaborate and expensive technical effects to properly work as written. And this isn't even getting into the fact that in between the development and premiere of Turn Off the Dark, Disney ended up buying Marvel, and Disney definitely isn't going to let an infamous failure like this out of their grasp, not anytime soon. They're on the suing daycare centers level of brand control, and I doubt they want to have any more attention placed on an expensive, critically panned flop. And considering that no one seems particularly attached to the script in these songs, not even Bono and the Edge themselves, if there's another Spider-Man musical production, it'll probably be a completely original thing. I don't think Disney would let them carry the musical it. Julie Taymor begged for a pre-recording of 1.0 to be done before the retool, and it didn't happen. And any professionally shot footage of it made for documentary purposes are apparently locked behind legal issues, probably never going to see the light of day. Which is a shame. I guess that's why it's up to fans to keep spreading around whatever clips they can, backing up whatever recordings get placed online, reading the script, and passing around info about the show. It can't truly go away as long as we still talk about it. Turn Off the Dark is a complicated musical with a complicated legacy, but I think it's one that deserves to be remembered. It's this weird, complex, ambitious mess that I've been obsessed with for years, and I hope someday it gets more attention and respect, either as an important failure in Broadway history, or as a flawed but ambitious piece of art in which Peter Parker has to fuck a spider to death. This video talked a lot about supporting creators and giving them an outlet for their work. Did you know that there's a way you can do that right now while also experiencing my videos early and without ads? I'm talking about Nebula, a streaming award-nominated service built by content creators for content creators. Get to experience exclusive and ad-free content from some of your favorite online essayists like Maggie Mayfish, Princess Weeks, Sarah Zad, that one creator whose body I sometimes possess, and, well, me. It's the best way to watch content from creators you know, as well as discover exciting and cool new ones. And thanks to a deal with CuriosityStream, if you go to curiositystream.com/LadyEmily, you can get an entire year of CuriosityStream and Nebula for just $14.79, a 26% discount. If you don't know, CuriosityStream is a streaming service focused on documentaries and nonfiction content. This video focused a lot on Greek mythology, which is always a fascinating and endless subject. If you want to learn more about Greek mythology in a non-Spider-Man context, then perhaps you'd be interested in checking out Myths and Monsters, a documentary series that goes over famous Greek myths and explores the history of these stories and analyzes why they have endured for so long, paired with some incredibly amazing artwork. It's a fun time, especially if you also grew up with a Greek mythology phase for some reason and find the stuff compelling. You can watch Myths and Monsters, as well as thousands of other excellent documentaries on CuriosityStream. And the best part is that so long as you have CuriosityStream, you'll also have access to Nebula. Once you use the code to sign up for CuriosityStream, you'll receive an email from Nebula granting you access. So go to curiositystream.com/LadyEmily to get a year of CuriosityStream and Nebula at a discount and enjoy the hours upon hours of content there is to choose from. I'd like to once again thank my patrons for the contributions and help making all of this possible. I'd especially like to thank, and hopefully pronounce correctly, 9 Arachne. I said that wrong, I'm sure of it. Adam Ellison, Aiden Isaacs, Agatha, Ale, Alex de Astos, Alexander Wagan, Allison the Purple, Ali E, Alt F4 Games, Alice in the Middle, Amanda Uisk, Anarcho Art, Annabelle, Anselm, Arif Hassan, Arpeggio, Average Sylvania Shipper, Azure Squirrel, Ben Holland, Bleh 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 Bleh, Brendan Buck, Brett Kozak, Bruni, C. Sporn, Caleb Guthrie, Cappuccino, Carmen J., Chad Horton, Charlotte Ozel, Christopher Patton, Christopher Spiller, Cinemageddon Reviews, Chair Baker, Clara M., Comrade AP, Critical Ham, Daisy Hind, Dan Connell, Dan Pierce, Dana Carrier, Darren Ost, David Portnov, David Rose, Doc Trancy, Donovan Campbell, Dragners, Dustin C., Ela Maxima, Elijah Siddiqui, Elizabeth V. Haste, Elliot Berry, Emery LaFleur, Emily Taylor, Emma K., Emmeline Fengia, Executive Nerd, Faye Gregory, Frederick Ostrom, Friedborg, GameChamp 3000, Gavin Daphne King, Giancarlo, GSV Sleeper Service, the sea may have to become as stone or steel, the sky too, Gwen Wafer, Hallucigino, Hamish Steele, Hayden, Hekamon, Hunter Goldstein, Huntakar, I'm doing a great job, Isaac Smith, Isla Edmund, Ivory, J.B., James Rule, Jane Delmonico, Jan the Final Girl, J. Marquez Durst, Gerard Highfield, Jess, Jessica Lane, Jester Gambit, John Logan, Jordan Tullis, Josh Sanders, Kay Nakamura, Katrina Leonidakis, Kay Burris, Kelsey Hoover, Cooch Hustinator. I hope I said that right, otherwise I just called someone Cooch Hustinator. Corono, Kyle Slaby, Leandro Ferraz, Life in the Black, Madry Bread, Mark Kent, Mason Barber, Matt Swanson, Maxine Chiplin, MD the Dude, Megatron Tarantulas, Michael Freitag, Michael Kellett, Michael Thompson, Micah, Mike Williams, Mimi, Mr. Bones, Molly Schaefer, Mr. Schmiff, Myriad, Nazreen, Nathan Y, Nick Skahe, Nodka, Norris Sola, Not Horses, Orbital Hippie, Orlin the Dog, Oxnard Montalvo, Peter from Denmark, oh shit, sorry I said fuck Denmark like a few videos ago, Peter, Pieman III, Quithar, Ramona Montagani, Richard Pryor, Riley O'Neill, Richie Ty, Robert Jones, Rose Dale, Rusty Kelly, Sabrina, Saffron C, Sam Wade, Samantha Cinder, Samuel Snap, Sarah Zed, Saxon Fox, Scarebank, Sean Hamilton, Sean Lane, Sefus, 7 Goblins in a Trench Coat, Simon Welsh, Scary, Earth Human, Skylar Conlon, Smitty McGrotsmeat, Sophie Uppercase, Sound Effects Madison, Sovereign Conscriss, Spoop Nudie, Stadomo, Steve Reynolds, Stephen Fan, Tanner Methven, Dow, Tara, The Lair of Lore, The Numbers Game, Third to the Left, Tim Delegati, Tobias Lutrne, Tommy Latola, Trejon Dunkley, Terindo, Tyler P., Unicorn Harrison, Ursula Major, Void Spooler, Woody Sims, Yov Fine, York, Una Ueda, Zach Gruten, and Zara Brill. Thank you once again for your support. Sorry once again if I mispronounced any names. I'm bad at things. But your support really helps a lot, and these credit sequences get really long, but it honestly stuns me each time how long they get, and it's incredibly exciting. Okay, so now for the real reason I made this vid. So, according to the Turn Off the Dark merch store, one of the products that was offered was an officially licensed Turn Off the Dark blanket, and I have wanted one for over 10 years. Of course, the official merch store is long closed, so I've had to look secondhand, but so far I have never found one for sale. I know they have to exist somewhere. Someone bought this fucking blanket. I have been having trouble sleeping, and I really think what would help would be the warm, comforting fabric embrace of Spider-Man. So use the hashtag #GetEmilyTheBlanket to help me find an official Turn Off the Dark blanket and finally get a good night's sleep. That's hashtag #GetEmilyTheBlanket. This is the most important social cause of our time. I cannot stress this enough. Hashtag #GetEmilyTheBlanket.